Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we are settling into a story that has haunted the dreams of sailors for nearly 3,000 years. A tale woven from the very fabric of ancient Greek mythology, one that speaks not merely of monsters or death, but of the deepest temptations that dwell within the human heart. Tonight, we venture into the waters between worlds, to an island wrapped in mist and music, where men have met their end not through violence or cruelty, but through beauty so profound that resistance seemed almost a betrayal of the soul itself. This is the story of Odysseus and the Sirens. But before we can understand the danger that awaited him in those dark waters, we must first understand the man himself and the terrible price that had already been exacted from him long before he ever heard their song. Odysseus, King of Ithaca, was a man whose name had become synonymous with cunning and intelligence. Yet intelligence does not shield one from the capriciousness of the gods. The Trojan War had lasted 10 long years, 10 years of siege, of bloodshed, of heroes meeting their ends on foreign soil far from home. Troy had been a city wrapped in walls so high that they seemed impregnable. For a decade, the Greeks hammered against those walls like waves against stone. It was Odysseus who devised the deception that ended the war. While other heroes relied on their strength of arm, Odysseus understood that victory belongs to the clever. He conceived of the Trojan horse, that great wooden monument that appeared to be a gift to the gods, but which concealed within its vast belly the very soldiers needed to breach the city's walls. When the unsuspecting Trojans hauled that horse within their gates, their fate was sealed. Troy burned. The victory was complete, but the cost was immeasurable. Poseidon, god of the sea, and father of the Cyclops Polyphemus, whom Odysseus had blinded years earlier, held particular contempt for the clever king. Poseidon did not wish for Odysseus to die quickly. He wanted to torment him, to deny him the comfort of home, to make every attempt to reach Ithaca an agony of suffering orchestrated by divine wrath. And so began the long Odyssey. What should have taken weeks stretched into years. Odysseus and his men encountered the Cicones, the lotus eaters whose magic fruit induced forgetfulness, and the terrible Cyclops himself. His fleet was reduced. Men were lost to hunger, to anger, to the capriciousness of fate. By the time Odysseus reached the island of Circe, he was no longer a king returning home in triumph. He was a man worn down by years of wandering, desperate and afraid, yet still clinging to hope. Circe's island rose out of the sea like something from a fever dream. The shores were carpeted with flowers of impossible colors, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with enchantment. Circe was a goddess of sorts, daughter of Helios, the sun god, who possessed powers of transformation that went far beyond what mortal men could comprehend. When Odysseus's men ventured inland, they were greeted with hospitality and food. But Circe's hospitality came with a hidden price. She had enchanted her wine and her food with magic, and those who consumed them underwent a terrible transformation. Their bodies became increasingly bestial until Odysseus's men found themselves transformed into pigs, not dead, not freed, but imprisoned in animal form, their human consciousness still trapped within bodies of flesh and swine hair. Odysseus himself, warned by a god and endowed with natural resistance to magic, managed to confront Circe. He drew his sword, and she, seeing his determination, offered him a bargain. In exchange for her safety, she would restore his men and offer him counsel. Circe sat with him in her palace, and she spoke in a voice heavy with warning. "When you sail from this island," she told him, "you will come to a place where creatures dwell. There are the Sirens, beings of unearthly beauty and power. They sing, and their song is like nothing you have ever heard. It promises everything a man could desire. To those who hear it, the Sirens offer knowledge of all that has happened and all that will come. They speak of glory, of wisdom, of secrets hidden since the beginning of time." Odysseus listened, but he was intrigued rather than afraid. He had faced so many dangers already. How much could the song of creatures, no matter how beautiful, truly threaten him? Circe must have seen the arrogance in his eyes, for she continued more forcefully. "You do not understand. The Sirens are not like other monsters. They do not attack with teeth or claws. Their power lies in their song, and that power is absolute. Those who hear the Siren's song and retain their sanity are exceedingly rare. Some say it has never happened." She stood and walked to a great vat of beeswax, the substance that bees produce to build their honeycombs. It was a substance valued by the ancients for many purposes, and it had a unique property. It could block sound. "Take this," Circe said, pressing the wax into Odysseus's hands. "When you approach the island of the Sirens, you must have your men fill their ears with this wax. They must be unable to hear anything at all. But you—" She paused, and a strange look crossed her face. "You, Odysseus, have the mind to want to know all things. You cannot resist the temptation to hear what they offer. And so I tell you this: you may hear them if you wish, but you must bind yourself to the mast of your ship. Have your men tie you securely, and then have them row past as quickly as they can. No matter how much you beg, no matter what commands you give, they must not release you. Can your men do this?" Odysseus looked at the small group of sailors who remained to him. Weathered men, loyal men, men who had survived countless trials alongside him. "They will do as I command," he said, with more certainty than he felt. Before Odysseus left Circe's island, she gave him one more crucial piece of information. She told him that beyond the Sirens, he would face other dangers. She spoke of Scylla and Charybdis, two monsters that lurked in a narrow strait. Scylla was a creature of 6 heads and 12 feet, so horrible that to look upon her was to understand the true meaning of nightmare. Charybdis was a whirlpool of such tremendous force that it could swallow entire ships whole, drawing them down into depths from which nothing ever returned. "Between those two, you must navigate," Circe said. "Lose too many men to Scylla, and you will have insufficient crew to row away from the whirlpool. Avoid Scylla, and you will be pulled into Charybdis's maw. You cannot escape without loss. Choose which loss you can bear." It was a prophecy of compromise, of accepting the lesser evil in order to survive it all. The very concept of the Sirens in ancient Greek mythology is far more complex than modern retellings suggest. To truly understand what Odysseus faced, we must delve into their nature and their place in Greek myth. The name Siren comes from ancient Greek, and its precise etymology remains debated among scholars. Some suggest it derives from a word meaning to bind, which speaks to their capacity to bind men to their will through music and enchantment. In Homer's account, only 2 sirens are mentioned. Later authors expanded the mythology, speaking typically of 3 sirens, naming them Leucotia, Partenope, and Ligeia. Different sources offer different names and sometimes different numbers, but the canonical count of 3 seems to have become standard in later Greek thought. The origin stories of the Sirens vary depending on which ancient author one consults, and each variation reveals different aspects of Greek understanding of these creatures. The most common origin story, preserved in the works of Ovid and others, connects the Sirens to Persephone, the goddess who was abducted into the underworld by Hades himself. According to this account, the Sirens were originally companions of Persephone, nymphs who attended her in her daily life. When Persephone was taken down into the darkness beneath the earth, her mother Demeter grieved with a fury so profound that it literally broke the world. The crops ceased to grow, the earth became barren and hostile. Winter descended upon the land, and all living things began to wither and die. In this myth, Demeter was moved to grant the Sirens wings so that they might search for her lost daughter, flying across the lands and seas to find any trace of Persephone. With these wings, the Sirens could soar through the air with a grace and freedom unknown to earthbound creatures. Yet their search was ultimately futile. They could not penetrate the barriers between the world of the living and the world of the dead. They could not reach Persephone. Some versions say that Demeter, in her grief and rage, transformed the Sirens as punishment for their failure. She cursed them, turning them into the half-bird, half-woman creatures that would come to haunt sailors and lead men to their deaths. In other versions, the Sirens themselves requested the wings from Demeter, asking for the ability to search more effectively for their lost mistress. When that search inevitably failed, they were transformed into something else, cursed, changed, made into the monsters of legend. There is profound sadness embedded in these origin stories. The Sirens were not born evil. They were created or transformed as a result of loss, of grief, of divine punishment. Perhaps that is why their song carries such power. Perhaps their enchanting voices carry within them the echo of their original purpose, the search for something precious and irretrievably lost. Perhaps that is why their song speaks of knowledge and revelation. They are still searching, in a way, still reaching out across the void for that which can never be found. Other myths offer different parentages. Some sources claim the Sirens were the daughters of Achelous, the chief river god of Greece, and one of the 9 muses, those divine beings associated with music, poetry, and the arts. This parentage makes sense, for the muses were known for their extraordinary musical talents. A siren descended from a muse would naturally possess a voice of incomparable beauty. Yet there is an interesting tension here. In one myth, the Sirens were said to have challenged the muses to a singing contest. It was not merely a friendly competition, but a test of superiority. The muses won. The Sirens were utterly humiliated. In punishment for their arrogance, the muses plucked out the feathers from the Sirens' bodies and fashioned them into crowns for themselves. The Sirens were left diminished, their beauty marred, their arrogance punished. This myth too speaks of a fall from grace, of beings who once had power and status being reduced to something lesser, something more monstrous. It adds layers to our understanding of the Sirens as creatures defined by loss and degradation. The physical form of the Sirens in ancient Greek art and literature is remarkably consistent. They are depicted as beings with the upper body of a woman, usually beautiful, sometimes with the features of a mature woman rather than a young maiden, and the lower body and wings of a bird. Their arms often end in claws or talons. Their wings could fold and unfold, allowing them to rest on their island or to take flight when pursuing a ship across the waves. Their dwelling place, according to various sources, was the island of Anthomoessa, or, alternatively, the Isle of Serenum Scopuli, as the Romans would later name it. This island was said to be located somewhere between Sicily and Italy in the Mediterranean. The island was surrounded by rocky shores, treacherous reefs, and dangerous waters. The shoreline was covered with the bones of sailors who had wrecked themselves there in ages past. The flesh still hung from some of these bones in various stages of decomposition, a grim testament to the lethal nature of the Sirens' song. The Sirens spent their time in a meadow on this island, surrounded by flowers and the remnants of their tragic feast. They had instruments, lyres, and flutes, and they played these while they sang. The combination of musical instruments and the supernatural quality of their voices created a symphony that was utterly irresistible to those who heard it. Now we come to perhaps the most crucial aspect of the Siren mythology, the nature of their song itself. In Homer's account, the Sirens sing to Odysseus specifically about their knowledge. They sing of things that have happened and things that will come to pass. They offer wisdom, revelation, the kind of profound understanding that separates the enlightened from the ignorant. This is not a call based on lust or simple attraction. This is a call to the intellect, to the deepest human desire for understanding and truth. Consider what Odysseus was. He was not a man of simple pleasures. He was, above all else, a man of intelligence and strategy. He had won a war through cunning rather than strength. He had devised the Trojan horse. He was a man who valued knowledge and wisdom, who sought to understand the world rather than simply to dominate it. And so, when the Sirens sang to him, they sang not of sensual pleasures, but of the one thing that Odysseus could not easily resist, the promise of knowledge. Imagine hearing a voice singing in perfect harmony with others. Imagine that these voices are more beautiful than any music you have ever heard, more exquisite and perfect than the greatest compositions of the greatest masters. And imagine that this beautiful voice is promising you something you have longed for your entire life. It is promising that you will come to understand all the secrets of the universe, all the hidden truths, all the knowledge that has been concealed from ordinary mortals. What would you do? The Sirens' song carried a subtle but devastating lie at its core. They promised knowledge, but they did not promise a future in which Odysseus would be alive to use or to share that knowledge. They promised wisdom, but not survival. They were offering him enlightenment at the cost of his life, and in the moment of hearing their song, that price would seem eminently reasonable. There is a famous passage in Homer where the Sirens sing directly to Odysseus. The exact words vary depending on the translation, but the sense is clear. They speak to him with intimate knowledge of him, addressing him by name and by his deeds. They acknowledge his role in the Trojan War. They speak as if they know him personally, as if they have been waiting specifically for him to pass by their island. This personalization is itself part of their power. They do not sing a generic song that would appeal to any sailor. They sing to each person who hears them, offering them their heart's deepest desire. To a man motivated by sexual desire, they might sing of beautiful companions and endless pleasure. To a man motivated by glory, they might sing of eternal fame. To a man like Odysseus, motivated by intellect and understanding, they sing of knowledge and truth. And here is something profound. The Sirens are not lying. they truly do possess knowledge. They have lived for a long time, watched many sailors pass, heard many stories. They possess a kind of wisdom that transcends the merely mortal. The tragedy is that this genuine gift can only be received by remaining on their island, by remaining close to them, which inevitably leads to the destruction of the ship and the death of all aboard. By the time Odysseus and his men drew near to the Sirens' island, he had already undergone an immense journey. He had sailed from Troy toward home, been blown off course by Poseidon's fury, encountered countless dangers. His fleet, which had once numbered many ships, had been reduced. He had lost men to rage, to stupidity, to starvation and violence. His fleet, which had once numbered many ships, had been reduced. After ascending back into the world of the living from his descent into Hades, Odysseus had returned to Circe's island, armed with prophecy and knowledge of what lay ahead. As the ship drew near to the island, Odysseus gathered his men. He did not hide from them what he intended to do. He told them what Circe had told him. He told them that they would hear the Sirens' song, that it would be the most beautiful sound they had ever heard, that it would make them want to steer the ship toward the island to the inevitable destruction of all aboard. "You will not hear it," Odysseus told them. "I am giving you this," and he held up the wax. "You will take this and fill your ears with it completely. Push it in deep. You will not remove it until I tell you that we are safely past." Some of the men accepted this without question. They had seen enough of the world to know that survival often depended on trusting the wisdom of their leader. Others looked uncertain. To deliberately make yourself deaf in the middle of an ocean journey was a kind of temporary suicide, a surrender of control that went against every instinct of self-preservation. But Odysseus was their king, and they obeyed. As they began to approach the island more closely, they could see it on the horizon. It was not a large place, but it was distinctive. The rocks rose up from the sea like the teeth of some great beast. The island was covered with vegetation that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. And there, sitting on the rocky shore, they could make out forms, shapes that might have been women, until you looked closer and saw the wings, the talons, the impossible hybrid nature of what sat waiting for them. "Begin," Odysseus commanded. "Fill your ears now. Do not remove the wax until I signal that it is safe." His men worked swiftly. They took the wax and pressed it into their ears, stuffing it deep, making themselves deaf to the world. As each man completed this task, Odysseus saw something shift in their expressions. The world must have seemed suddenly quieter to them, the sound of the wind and the waves muted. The normal auditory landscape of the ship reduced to a muffled, distant thing. Now came the moment that Odysseus had both anticipated and dreaded. He had ordered his men to bind him to the mast. The mast was the central pole of the ship, rising up from the deck and supporting the sails. It was a fixed point, immovable once the ship was in motion. His crew approached him with rope, strong rope, the kind used to secure cargo, the kind that would not break easily. They bound his arms to the mast, wrapping the rope around his torso multiple times, tying knots that were complicated and difficult to undo. They bound his legs as well, making sure that he could not simply stand and walk, that he could not move more than a few inches in any direction. "No matter what I say," Odysseus reminded them, his voice firm despite the fear and anticipation he must have been feeling. "No matter what I command you, do not release me. Even if I threaten you, even if I beg you, even if I claim that the ropes will kill me, You row faster and faster, and you keep your ears sealed. You do not listen to my voice." The men, though they could not hear him now, could see his lips moving, could see the intensity in his eyes. They nodded their understanding, and so they sailed toward the island of the Sirens. As the ship drew nearer, the distance closing between them and the rocky shore, something in the air changed. There was a kind of quality to it, a thickness, as if the very atmosphere of the place was different from anywhere else. And then, faintly at first, so faintly that Odysseus almost wondered if he was imagining it, he heard something. It was a voice. Or rather, it was voices, multiple voices singing together in impossible harmony. There was no question that it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It transcended the merely musical. It seemed to go beyond sound itself, to speak directly to something deep within his consciousness. The voices sang, and they sang to him. "Odysseus," they called. "Odysseus, mighty King of Ithaca, hero of the Trojan War. We have been waiting for you. We know your deeds, your intelligence, your cunning. We know how you devised the Trojan horse. We know all of these things, and we know so much more." The music swelled, and Odysseus felt an almost irresistible urge to move, to turn toward the sound, to command his men to alter course and bring the ship closer to the island. "We know all that has been," the voices continued. "We know all that is happening now in the world. We know the fate of those who sailed with you. We know what is happening in your home of Ithaca. We know whether your wife Penelope still waits for you. We know the future, Odysseus. We know what will happen to you, whether you will reach home, what trials still await you. We know all of this, and we are willing to share it with you." The song was working on him exactly as Circe had warned. Odysseus found himself struggling against the ropes, not violently at first, but with an increasing desperation. The questions the Sirens had raised, questions about his wife, about his fate, about the future, these were things that had tormented him throughout his long journey. What would he give for answers to these questions? What would he not sacrifice? He wanted to hear more. His entire being was focused on that desire, that need to hear what the Sirens had to tell him. "Untie me," he shouted to his men. But of course, they could not hear him. Their ears were filled with wax. They could see him moving, could see his mouth working, could see the intensity of emotion on his face, but they could not hear the words he was speaking. All they knew was what he had told them earlier. No matter what he did, no matter what commands he gave, they were to keep rowing past the island without stopping. "Row," he tried commanding. "Row toward the island. That is my order. That is the command of your king." Still, they could not hear him. They rowed, but they rowed in the direction Circe had told them to row, away from the island, past it, following the charted course that would take them safely beyond the Sirens' reach. The song grew louder, more insistent. The Sirens, sensing that their prey was slipping away, began to sing with more intensity, more passion, as if they were pouring every ounce of their supernatural power into this final attempt to lure Odysseus to them. "You can be free of your suffering," they sang. "You can have rest. You can have answers. You can have peace. All you need to do is ask your men to change course. All you need to do is come to us, and we will give you everything you have ever desired. We will tell you truths that will reshape your understanding of the universe. We will reveal to you the nature of fate itself. Is this not worth a small change in direction?" Odysseus threw himself against the ropes. He pulled with all his strength, trying to break free, trying to loosen the knots. He strained so hard that his muscles burned, that his joints screamed in pain. But the ropes held. They were too well tied, too strong. And meanwhile, he could feel the ship beginning to move past the island. The sirens' voices, though still beautiful, began to fade slightly as the distance between them and the shore increased. According to Homer's account, Odysseus tried to signal his men by frowning, by gesturing with his eyebrows, trying to communicate that they should come and release him. But his men, guided by the loyalty they had sworn to him when he bound himself to the mast, understood that this was precisely the temptation they had been warned about. They did not release him. They did not even approach. Instead, according to Homer, the men who had the most strength increased their rowing speed. Eurylochus and Perimedes, two of Odysseus's most trusted companions, rowed with such fury and focus that the ship began to move faster and faster, pulling away from the island with ever-increasing speed. And then something remarkable happened. The song of the sirens began to fade. Not because they had stopped singing, but because they were now too far away for Odysseus to hear them. The sound that had been so overwhelming, so utterly irresistible, diminished to a kind of echo, then to a memory. It took considerable time before Odysseus's desperation faded enough that he could safely be unbound. His men had to be sure that they were genuinely beyond the sirens' reach, that there was no chance of him regaining his senses and commanding them to turn around. Only when they were far enough away, when the island had become just a speck on the horizon, did they think it safe to approach their bound captain. They removed the wax from their ears. Immediately, the full sound of the world came flooding back to them, the rush of wind, the creak of the ship's timber, the slap of waves against the hull, the ordinary sounds of existence that they had been denied while their ears were sealed. And they unbound Odysseus from the mast. What he must have felt at that moment, when the ropes were removed and he could move freely again, can only be imagined. Perhaps relief, perhaps shame at how close he had come to destroying his ship and his crew. Perhaps lingering yearning for the song that had ceased to reach his ears, but not to echo in his mind. Homer tells us that when the men asked Odysseus if he wanted to speak about what he had heard, he initially declined. The experience was too profound, perhaps too painful, to talk about immediately. But eventually, he did begin to describe the song, to attempt to communicate what it had been like to hear something so beautiful and so deadly at once. Their voices, he told his men, were not what I expected. I thought they would tempt me with something base, something crude, but they offered me something more noble. They offered me knowledge. They claimed to know all the secrets of the world, all the things hidden from ordinary men. They promised to reveal things about my own fate, about my home and my wife. They made me believe that there was something greater and more important than my journey home, that to gain their knowledge would be worth any price. Now, having passed beyond the sirens, Odysseus and his men had to face their next trial. For Circe had warned them that beyond the sirens lay other dangers, and the most immediate of these were the monsters known as Scylla and Charybdis. These two creatures represented an impossible choice. Scylla was a monster of such horror that to describe her is almost to diminish her through language. She dwelt in a cave on one side of a narrow strait. She had 6 heads, each one as large as a man's body, each one possessing teeth designed to tear and rend flesh. She had 12 feet, and her entire body was covered with tentacle-like growths that allowed her to grab and pull things toward her. When a ship passed too close to her side of the strait, Scylla would reach out with these appendages and pluck sailors from the decks of their vessels, pulling them into the air and into her waiting mouths. On the opposite side of the strait was Charybdis, which was almost worse. Charybdis was a kind of living whirlpool, a creature that represented the destructive power of water itself. 3 times a day, Charybdis would draw in an enormous amount of water from the sea, creating a vortex so powerful that ships could not resist its pull. If a ship was caught in this current, it would be drawn down into depths from which nothing ever returned. So Odysseus's men faced a terrible choice: sail too close to Scylla and lose 6 men to the monster's jaws, or sail too close to Charybdis and risk the destruction of the entire ship. There was no route through the strait that avoided both dangers. Odysseus chose to sail slightly closer to Scylla than to Charybdis. It was the lesser of 2 terrible evils. Better to lose 6 men to the monster's hunger than to risk the entire crew and the ship itself. When they passed through, Scylla's heads rose up and plucked 6 sailors from the deck. Odysseus heard their cries as they were lifted into the air. He heard the terrible sound of the monster's jaws closing on their bodies. And then it was over. The ship had passed through. According to the accounts that survived from antiquity, the Sirens were fated to die if any mortal who heard their song should escape them and live to tell the tale. It was a curse or condition, perhaps imposed by the gods at the time the Sirens were transformed. The idea was that their power was absolute, that no mortal should be able to resist them. If a mortal did resist, they would have no reason to continue living. When Odysseus's ship sailed past them and disappeared beyond the horizon, the Sirens understood that this curse had been fulfilled. A mortal had heard their song. A mortal had not surrendered to their call. A mortal would survive and would tell others what he had experienced. The Sirens did not linger in their disappointment. Filled with despair and hopelessness, they walked to the edge of their island, and then, one by one, they threw themselves into the sea, ending their lives in the depths of the waters that surrounded their home. Their bodies sank down into the darkness, and they troubled sailors no more. Some accounts suggest that their bodies were transformed after death, that they became the rocks and reefs surrounding their former island, a kind of permanent memorial to the creatures that had once dwelt there. There is a certain poignancy to this ending. The Sirens, who had been created or transformed as a result of loss and grief over Persephone, who had failed to save her or even to find her, who had been punished and humiliated by the Muses, ultimately came to an end not through violence from without, but through despair from within. They could not survive the knowledge that their power had failed, that they were not invincible, that a mortal man could hear their song and choose not to surrender to it. And now we reach the conclusion of this tale that has endured for nearly 3,000 years. The story of Odysseus and the Sirens is not primarily a tale of supernatural danger or the existence of monsters. It is a meditation on temptation and the human capacity to resist it. It is a story about the kinds of things that can lure us away from our goals, the kinds of promises that are most seductive because they appeal to our highest values rather than our basest impulses. The genius of Odysseus in this encounter was not that he was physically stronger than the Sirens, or that he possessed some special immunity to their magic. He was not immune. He heard their song. He was tempted. He tried to break free from his restraints. He wanted nothing more than to sail toward them. What Odysseus possessed was the wisdom to know his own limitations. He knew that he could not rely on his own willpower alone to resist the Sirens' song. He knew that the temptation was too strong, the promise too great. And so he took practical measures. He had his men bind him. He had them fill their ears with wax. He prepared himself for the encounter in such a way that even if he wanted to surrender, he would be physically prevented from doing so. This is a profound statement about human nature and human strategy. Sometimes the way to resist temptation is not through supreme willpower or exceptional virtue. Sometimes it is through practical preparation, through environmental design, through asking for help, and then trusting that help even when we want to retract it. This is also a meditation on leadership and trust. Odysseus had to trust that his men would obey him even when they could not understand what he was experiencing. The men, hearing nothing but silence in their wax-filled ears, could only see their captain thrashing against his restraints, crying out, apparently in distress. They had to trust that this was part of the plan, that their obedience in this moment was the correct course of action, even though every other instinct told them to help their suffering leader. There is also something in this story about accepting limitations and accepting help. Odysseus could not simply will himself to be immune to the Sirens' song. He had to ask Circe for the wax. He had to ask his men to bind him. He had to surrender control and put his safety in the hands of others. In a culture that valued individual heroism and personal strength, this is a remarkable moment, a moment where the greatest hero recognizes that survival depends on asking for and accepting help. Moreover, the story speaks to the nature of knowledge itself and the relationship between knowledge and wisdom. The Sirens offered knowledge. They promised to reveal truths that had been hidden. And yet, the obtaining of that knowledge would have resulted in death. This raises a profound question. What is the value of knowledge if you do not survive to use it or to share it? The story suggests that there is a kind of knowledge that is not worth the price of obtaining it, that there are truths that are less important than survival, less important than duty, less important than return home to those who love us. Odysseus's choice to pass by the Sirens without stopping represents a kind of wisdom that is different from the knowledge the Sirens offered. It is the wisdom to know when not to pursue knowledge, when to say, not now, when to accept that some truths can wait, and that sometimes the completion of immediate duties takes precedence over the satisfaction of intellectual curiosity. The Sirens have survived in human culture for nearly 3,000 years because their story speaks to something eternally relevant. Every generation faces its own sirens, its own temptations, its own voices calling from the rocks, promising that if we would only change course, if we would only abandon our current path, we would find what we truly seek. In the ancient world, the siren song was one thing. In the medieval and Renaissance periods, interpretations shifted, and they became associated with temptations of the flesh, with lust and sexual desire. In the modern world, we might imagine the sirens' voices coming through different media, through social networks promising connection, through entertainment promising escape, through substances promising relief from pain, through ideologies promising certainty in an uncertain world. The essential structure remains the same. The siren's song is always the song of something beautiful and real and desirable, but something that, if pursued, will lead to our destruction. And our task, like Odysseus's, is to navigate past it without stopping, with the help of companions, with practical strategies to prevent ourselves from being lured astray, with the wisdom to know that we cannot simply rely on our own willpower. Homer's Odyssey is, in many ways, a poem about a man trying to get home. It is not really a poem about war or conquest, or even about battles with monsters. It is a poem about the long, difficult process of returning to where you belong, of reconstructing a life after tremendous upheaval, of finding your way back to what matters most. Throughout this journey, Odysseus is tempted again and again to abandon his goal of returning home. The Lotus Eaters offer him the temptation of forgetfulness. Circe offers him the temptation of magical power and sensual pleasure. The Sirens offer him the temptation of knowledge and revelation. At nearly every step of his journey, there is something or someone trying to convince him that his goal, returning to Ithaca and to his faithful wife Penelope, is not worth pursuing, that there is something better, something more fulfilling, something more worthy of his talents and intellect. And yet Odysseus persists. When he finally does reach Ithaca, after all these years of wandering, after all these trials and tribulations, he finds that his home is not the peaceful place he left behind. In his absence, suitors have invaded his palace, determined to win the hand of his wife and to claim his throne. But eventually, after he drives away the suitors and reclaims his place, he can be reunited with his wife. Penelope, who through all these long years has waited for him, has refused to abandon hope, even though everyone told her that her husband was surely dead, that she should remarry and move on with her life. In the constancy of Penelope's love and the persistence of Odysseus's journey, the poem celebrates a kind of dedication to what truly matters, a refusal to be swayed by temptation or despair, a faith that reunion is possible even after the longest separation. The Sirens, in this context, represent one of the crucial tests that Odysseus must pass in order to prove himself worthy of returning home. To yield to the Sirens would be to abandon the journey, to reject the purpose for which he has suffered so much. To resist the Sirens is to affirm that returning home, being reunited with his wife and son, fulfilling his duty as king and husband. These things are more important than any knowledge, any wisdom, any enlightenment that might be offered by supernatural beings. There is a kind of moral framework embedded in this myth that speaks to enduring human values. It teaches us that the most important commitments are often the most ordinary ones, not the pursuit of extraordinary knowledge or supernatural power, but the return home to those who love us, the fulfillment of our duties to family and community, the maintenance of bonds that hold society together. The Siren's song, for all its beauty, is fundamentally a song of abandonment. It is a song designed to seduce travelers away from their paths, away from their purposes, away from their people. To resist it is to affirm that these bonds and duties are sacred, that they are worth more than any temptation, no matter how beautiful or how profound. And so we reach the final notes of this tale that has endured for so long, that has been retold and reinterpreted countless times, that continues to speak to us across the millennia. The story of Odysseus and the Sirens is the story of temptation met with wisdom, of human limitation acknowledged and overcome through community and preparation, of the pursuit of goals that matter trumping the pursuit of goals that merely glitter with the allure of the forbidden or the unfamiliar. To the listeners who have followed Odysseus on this portion of his journey, through the trial with the Sirens and beyond, the myth offers no guarantee that resistance to temptation will make life easier. Odysseus goes on to face many more trials. He will encounter still more dangers before he finally reaches home. The path of resistance is not a path to comfort or ease. It is a path of continued struggle, of ongoing challenge, of determination maintained through hardship. But it is also a path that leads somewhere. It is a path that ends in reunion and restoration, in the reclamation of what was thought to be lost, in the triumph of constancy and loyalty over the seductions of the extraordinary. If you have ever felt the pull of something beautiful and dangerous, if you have ever been tempted to abandon your responsibilities in pursuit of something more exciting or more intellectually engaging, if you have ever heard a voice calling you away from your path, then the story of Odysseus and the Sirens is your story too. And the question that the myth asks you is the same question it has asked for thousands of years. Will you maintain your course? Will you stay true to what you have committed yourself to? Will you recognize temptation for what it is and find the strength and wisdom to pass by it? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the ancient seas and into the depths of mythology. If you enjoyed this exploration of Odysseus and the Sirens, I would be deeply grateful if you would consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss future journeys through the world of myth and legend. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, stories of gods and heroes, of transformation and tragedy, of the eternal human struggle with fate and desire. Come back and visit again as we continue to explore these tales that have shaped human culture since time immemorial. Thank you and good night.